Heather Vescent, am I pronouncing that right? Excellent. Is going to tell us all about the 50 billion identities, and we can argue about how many identities they're going to be or not and when, but the fact there's going to be lots of them is not in question. I'm Andy Smolik, and I'm really excited to have a mobile and IoT track this year that is so well attended. It's fantastic. We will work next year to make sure we get a much bigger room. With that, Heather's with Purple Tornado, and she's going to tell you a little bit about herself and what she does. But for now, let's jump into 50 billion identities.
Great, thanks, Andy. So everyone, thank you so much for coming out after lunch. It's great to see such a large room packed with people. My name's Heather Vescent. I run a strategic intelligence and consultancy company called the Purple Tornado. It's been around since 2006. I'm a trained futurist, an author, and a researcher. I've written a couple books on cybersecurity, cyber attack survival manual, and about a year ago, I co-wrote a book on self-sovereign identity, the comprehensive guide to self-sovereign identity. Both of those are ebooks, or the Self-Sovereign Identity is an ebook. You can get these both on Amazon. I'm also a filmmaker. One of the best ways to communicate the future is by showing it. Who likes to read a 200-page report? I'm the only one who does. You, great. We'll talk more. So, and then you can find me on Twitter at Heather Vescent. This research that I'm sharing today was funded by DHS Science and Technology Cybersecurity Directorate. It was awarded last year, and we did a series, 3 separate topic areas of research. I am sharing some research today on non-person entity identity. I had a co-researcher, Clea Young, which several of you probably know her. She worked on some of this work with me as well. The report is public. It was paid for by your tax dollars. You can download it at bit.ly/NPE report. The objective of this research was to understand the market gaps in the private sector. So private sector companies develop products and services with a profit incentive, and those products and services don't always solve the comprehensive problems that we have. So the government likes to understand where the market gaps are. So that was the objective of this research. And we focused on non-person entity identity related to banking and finance, because banking and finance is a high attack surface. So I'm going to be sharing some of that research here. This really just scratches the surface of what's in the report, so if you're interested, you can download it. So the current state of where we are today from my perspective is that past solutions have created the problems we have today. We have new technologies that we're constantly developing that open up new opportunities to solve problems. We solve the same problems over and over with new technology, furthermore completely solving those problems, but then also introducing new problems as well. This is not a bad thing. This is what we do as humans. We solve things, we create new problems, we create new ways to solve it. That's how we evolve as a species. The reason I wanted to do this talk was based on my research. I saw an exponential number of identities that I did not think our identity systems were really grasping the size of the problem. And so we're going to be onboarding billions of new identities: human identity, corporate or legal identity, IoT objects that are smart, dumb things that we're going to track through packages or the supply chain, and also robots that might have some bit of their own intelligence or autonomy. Additionally, one thing that's really important about this time that we're in today is that we are increasing our regulation. In the past, there's been a desire to have less regulation. We are moving a trend to have more regulation. I personally think that's probably a good thing. So, where did I get this number from, 50 billion identities? So, I really wanted to call this talk 1 trillion identities, but I couldn't get the numbers to add up initially. But then I did find out. So we start with human identity. I took the 7.7 billion humans, 34 to 48% are online. I estimated each human that's online has 2 government plus 5 online identities, which is 18 to 26, give or take, identities. In the small side, we've got corporate legal identity. We only have 180 million companies. Of those, they also have multiple identities, and they're just shy of 1 trillion. Then down here in the bottom corner, according to Gartner, they had a report that came out that said there'd be 25 billion IoT connected devices by 2021. When I presented some of this research at EIC last month and heard some talks there, I heard someone quote 75 billion IoT objects by 2026. So there we get our 1 trillion, real easy that way. And then over here on the other side, we have the packages that we track daily. And these are UPS, FedEx. This is a very small number, 9 billion. This gets us to 50 billion identities very easily. And then we've got a new one, robot identity. So that wasn't even in the scope of this initial work. That's kind of come up in the conversations. So hey, who knows where that's going to go? That's also going to be NPE identity. So what is NPE identity? So I keep using this term NPE, non-person entity identity. A lot of people don't know what that means. And when we researched and interviewed people, they didn't use this term. Nobody understood what this was outside of their own siloed silo. So NPE identity is corporate legal identity. It could be an IoT device, a smart or dumb object. And there's a legacy definition that we didn't explore much, which is a system identity. This could be a system that is a piece of software that's running on a system, on a network, that could be on a specific computer or something. NPEs are given identity. So here's an example. 2 people are founding a company. They go put their paperwork, give it to the Secretary of State. It's only when the Secretary of State assigns an ID does that legal entity become actually a legal entity. Prior to that, it's just people wanting to do it. Now, that legal identity is used to create more identifiers that company can use. You can get a DUNS number, you can get an LEI number from the Global LEI Foundation. If you have a patent, you'll get patents numbers. So you use that initial legal identity to have these multiple identities that you use. NPE identity requires a human behind it for ownership liability to understand who's responsible. Humans take action for NPEs, and NPEs take action for humans. And then I don't really touch very much on this, but all this, we collect and share data around all of this, like both sides up and down the chain. So I'll just kind of go through these numbers again real quick. So ownership, you've got companies, packages, and IoT devices are owned. Humans and companies have responsibility and liability. You could say humans are all responsible because sometimes companies collapse up to the human in charge, but also there's times when companies are absolutely just take responsibility. You have humans that act for companies. They don't go out and do things on their own. Humans have to do things for them. And you have NPEs that do things for humans. And then you have data and tracking on all of these. So you can see, like, NP is complex. These identities relate to each other, they interact with each other, and they depend on each other. The report we did identifies 11 market gaps. I'm going to go into 2 of them, but I'll just high level go over a few of them. So some of these market gaps are, they're kind of solved or partially solved, or maybe they're very expensive. Over here on the IoT side, 3, 4, and 5, there are solutions to those market gaps, but they're they're for like military grade. Over here on the corporate NPE side, with verified corporate data or ultimate beneficial owner, number 2, ultimate beneficial owner, we do have an idea of some of that, but it's not conclusive in some cases. I wanted to go into a couple of these. Gap number 4 is corporate delegation. It's one of my favorites. So this really shows the relationship between humans and NPE identity. Humans enter into contracts, take action, make financial transactions on behalf of a corporation. You have to know that the person taking that action actually legitimately can do that, so there's not fraud or other types of bad things that happen. Banks are pretty good at setting this up, but it's not real time. So someone could leave the company, and it might not even be nefarious. It's just, someone left the company or something happened, and you have people changing roles. So I think for addressing some national security issues, having real-time verified delegation would be very useful. The legal identity of IoT things is another interesting one. So I showed you how legal identity gets an identity assigned to it from a Secretary of State. IoT objects do not have this. They are not required by law or anything to have an identity assigned to them. A lot of them get identities either by the manufacturer or later on in the supply chain, but they're not required. Actually, I just want to pop back to number 2, tracking and auditing goods in the supply chain. I'm actually finishing up a deep dive into that right now. I'm writing the report on that. And there's a lot of implications for national security, terrorist financing, counterfeit goods, why you want to understand these identities and where they came from in the chain and verify that this is an authentic Louis Vuitton bag versus a knockoff. So if you guys are interested in tracking and auditing goods, I'm going to have a report coming out about that in a couple months. I'm a futurist, so I have to think about the future. I wanted to share a couple of my visions of the future for identity that I think we also should consider as well. This idea of an augmented identity. So I actually think we already have this today in some ways. We have our mobile phones, and that is part of our identity. We've augmented our identities with technology. We have software that takes action on our behalf. I think bill pay is a rudimentary kind of augmented financial AI. We have devices doing stuff for us, like I have an IoT weather station. It tracks things. It sends me alerts if various weather situations happening on my property. And we are collecting and sharing, and these devices are collecting and sharing data on our behalf. So right now, we really collapse this down to who, from a liability perspective, it's me, the human physical body, Heather, that's responsible for the bill pay if something goes wrong. But there's other nuances, other ways things could go wrong that might not be my responsibility, that might be partial or shared responsibility. So I think it would be interesting to explore a more nuanced identity that more truly reflects the reality of the situation of a blended human augmented identity. Another identity I like is the combined identity, which is where people come together in an ad hoc way to be able to join forces to maybe do a project that might require joint login or joint bank accounts or something like this, but they don't want to go and sign up for, they don't want to create like a legal identity. They don't want to create a company to do it. I would like to see a kind of lightweight collective identity where people could come together for a certain period of time, share credentials, share reputation, work for each other on each other's behalf, delegate activities, maybe allow someone to go have the ability to spend $50 to buy event materials or something like that from an authorized bank account, something like that. I think this also could include NPEs. We might want to have a combined identity that is maybe not our collective identity or augmented identity, but a combined identity that might be with different NPEs, maybe a company or a robot or your car or something like that. Why do we care about all of this? Well, we really care because we want to know who's responsible when something goes wrong, who's going to pay for it, who needs to fix it. I mentioned already the global trend for more regulation to understand who's going to, be responsible for these things. There's also a rising trend for people to work together and collaborate. This is companies on standards. which I think that's also a very good trend, because we need a lot of these things to be interoperable. We need them to be able to communicate with each other, as well as have the companies compete with each other in the marketplace. And as a futurist, I really wanted to envision the true scale of the problem. I don't have any answers for you. I wanted to be provocative, and my thinking is, I don't think we're developing identity systems today with this kind of scale in mind. I know that from a legal perspective, we've just barely scratched the surface on legal liability when some of these autonomous robots or identities, something goes wrong. I want to help us get ahead of this. I want us to not have to react. As a futurist, you can let the future hit you and react, or you can educate yourself about what it could happen and go out and meet the future instead. And I wanted to empower identity professionals to think about the scope of this so that we can really have some interesting ways to solve it. I also know in my own work that sometimes when you think of a really, really small problem, you think of it in a constrained area, you're like, these are the only solutions we can make for it. But when you expand and you look at all of the problems, it is an order of magnitude difference, and it requires you to approach these problems in a drastically different way. And so I wanted to kind of challenge you to think at that higher level. My goals for a future identity system is that it should manage 1 trillion identities and all their relationships. It needs to thrive in a dynamic environment and be resilient, not just efficient. Efficient is great, but efficient is fragile. Resilience means that the system can withhold shocks, and we need to build resilient systems for something like this. It should enable delegation between humans and NPEs. We're going to be working together. We need to involve automated systems, whether they're augmented or working with us. And it should just magically solve our current data and privacy problems, right? Why not throw that one in? So that's the conclusion of my report out. There's 2 reports available that you can download. This is the Entities, Identities registries. You can download that at bit.ly/NPE report. And there's also a second one. We did some research on securing voter data systems. You can download that too. That's bit.ly/VDS report. We go into the security of voter data systems and voter data in that report. And I think we have plenty of time for some questions if anyone has them. Yeah. Yeah, so the question was, I mentioned the global trend towards regulation. So as I do the research, I just see more, well, you've got GDPR in Europe, you've got California data protection, there's other data protections happening in China and Asia as well. So you've got that kind of wave happening. You have you've got government wanting to look into regulation for more KYC, AML. I mean, like that pretty much works, but it's not fully 100% effective, especially for combating or addressing national security issues. So it's really, and then it seems like there's also consortiums, so regulation and people working together, consortiums of people working together to try to solve some of these problems jointly. Now, a lot of organizations think that regulation is a drag and they don't want it. But actually, regulation can protect a company from liability in the media marketplace. This is what I've noticed when I've been researching supply chain. A company doesn't want to find out 20 levels later that their cobalt in your iPhone was mined by child miners in the Congo. And so that's why, one of the implications of some of this research is being able to track that so that that that's not conflict mineral. And unfortunately, because in a case like supply chain, it's so complex and so many levels deep, and there's transparency at many levels, but not the whole level. You need to have regulation to guide the way. Yeah, you have a question. Yeah, so that's a great question. Oh, do I see these as identities as self-attested identities and the problems? We already have a lot of problems with self-attested identity. That I get your question. So I don't know. I mean, this gap number 4, IT self-authentication, would IT number 4 and number 1, right? If we have number 1, legal identity of IoT things, and then 4, self-authentication, and 5, data integrity, it's like I know that this data is off of this sensor, that it is verified that that data is that sensor is that sensor. I don't know. I don't think that it's going to be only self-attested. I think you do need to have these registries there, and the registries are central places, but the data does not have to be centralized. So you can still use the decentralized technology in a centralized data registry, like here, like in that middle part. I don't know if that addressed your question, but we still have some.
Very much TBD right now. This question is an open question.
What do you think? Yeah, so those numbers, those types of identifiers, he was mentioning MAC addresses and serial numbers. We do have a section in the report that we identify various identifiers and identifier systems. This research has really made me love GS1. How many people here know what GS1 is? Yay, my GS1. Oh, you, of course you do. Of course you do. GS1 is this amazing company. They do the barcode, and they come up with all these different numbers, like all of the barcode numbers, everything that's on every product is a GS1 number. It's what makes global commerce possible. And they also do this LEI, this legal entity identifier, and they have a foundation, the GLEI GLEI Foundation. So if you are curious about identifiers, I highly recommend you look at GS1. They're global. Other questions? Yes. So the question was, when I looked at supply chain, do we consider components parts? We looked a bit into that. Supply chain is a fractal rabbit hole, and we had 5 months to do it. So we definitely put constraints around what we looked into. In some cases, tracking components is easier, like with auto parts. In other cases, it's harder because they don't already have identifiers on it. So we did a little research into it, but we don't go into it in that report. And if you're interested in the supply chain report, you can get in touch with me. Or if you download one of these other reports, it asks you for your email. So I'll let you guys know when that report comes out, probably early fall. Yes. Wait, I'm not sure I understand the question. It's like, did I look at privacy, the impact of privacy with identifiers?
Yes.
So we were focused on NPE identity. That to me, no, we did not look at that. We looked at it from the NPE side versus the question you're asking is the human with the NPEs around them. I agree. I totally agree. I think that'd be a really fun thing to look at. So great. Well, I think we're almost out of time here. And if you have questions, I'll be around the entire conference. You can come talk to me. And if you have other questions, my company and I like to find the answers to them. So thank you.